So moving on, should we assume the student wants accommodations for official HSE exams if they have self-identified as having a disability and indicated on their registration form that they want this?
Well, this is a great question. And the short answer is that it is the test taker's decision to apply for accommodations. As you can see, for GED exam, for example, it's only the test taker who can even apply for accommodations. And for the HiSET exam, while it's the supporter or parent or instructor can actually do it for the test taker, it's still all about the test taker who is actually requesting those accommodations. So the request for accommodation, the desire to have accommodations on the exams should really come from the test taker. Now, with this said, I also feel that it's very important for all of the instructors, for the educators, and for the supporters to have all of the information about their accommodations and make it available to their students. Whether this should happen during an orientation or some kind of a HSC class, the educator should be very clear that if the person has certain types of disabilities, then accommodations are available. They should tell them about the process, about how to request the accommodations, about the documentation, and also about the different types of accommodations that are usually provided, so the test takers don't have a wrong idea. So I think that this should be a combined approach. So test taker requested, but the test taker should have all of the information, and the information should come from the instructor.
That is really well put, because I think that is the key. Absolutely, I agree with you. Making sure that the student has the information they need to decide if they want to request the accommodations. I totally agree with that 100%. So the next question actually is speaking about a particular accommodation. Can you please clarify text-to-speech accommodations for students with a dyslexia diagnosis? Are they only able to get directions read aloud by the screen reader, or all of the text read aloud? Does this differ between GED and HiSET?
So the text-to-speech is slightly different for GED and HiSET. GED has JAWS that are available, the text-to-speech electronic platform that is actually available for test takers. Now, GED usually approves the use of JAWS only to students who cannot read because of the visual impairments that they have. Also, what GED does is that if somebody has a visual impairment and they really cannot see, then they would usually suggest a reader instead of using JAWS if the person is not comfortable with using JAWS. I don't know if you've ever used JAWS, but JAWS allows for everything to be read to them, or also the output is available as Braille if this is easier for the person. Notice how when I was talking about the reading accommodation, the reader, the JAWS, I said it's for people who are visually impaired. Here's what GED says. GED says that for slow readers, or let's say for people with dyslexia, what they will do is they will probably not approve some kind of text-to-speech. They will not approve JAWS. They will not approve a reader, but what they will do is they will approve an extended time. So usually that's what GED does in the case of dyslexia. Now, notice how I said usually. And GED always says that it's not one-to-one correspondence between a diagnosis and their accommodations. What they do is they will take into account all of the different conditions that the student has. So maybe in some cases, a person who suffers from dyslexia will get a reader, but in the majority of cases, what they will have is they will only have the extended time. Now, if we're talking about the HiSET exam, for HiSET exam, the JAWS are not really available, and the only thing that they have, the only accommodation that they have is they have an option of a reader. Now, a reader also is usually only approved for people who cannot see. And for people with dyslexia, they probably also will only give an accommodation of the extended time. Not talking about extended time, when both publishers give you an accommodation of extended time, you usually get 25% more time, 50% more time or 100% more time. So let's say if you're talking to HiSET exam and you're asking for a specific accommodation, usually you will not be able to get an accommodation of all day testing. There is no such thing as extended time of the whole day testing. So it's only really 25%, 50%, and 100% time. The last thing I also want to say about this is that if you get an accommodation of a reader, then usually together with that, you get your own room accommodation and also 100% extended time. They all understand that if somebody is reading to you, it's probably going to take you more time.
That does make sense. You actually did answer, in your answer, you were answering a question that I had in my mind already with that extended time. And I hadn't heard about the 25% extended time. I had only heard about 50 and 100% extended time. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it is true for both publishers, 25, 50, or 100. So the majority of people get 50% or 100% extended time.
So that's really, interesting. And it even brings into focus the difference between having a physical disability or a learning disability and the kind of accommodations that go with each one, because I've seen a wide variety of accommodations for folks, especially with physical disabilities. And I think sometimes that's maybe even a little bit easier to provide paperwork, with the diagnosis and things like that. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's important to understand the difference between those two. So the next question is also very specific to a particular student. I have a student who suffers from an undiagnosed disorder. He sees entities and hears voices. He will not go to a doctor to get the medical documentation he needs for testing accommodations. When I ask him to perform online practice tests on free websites, he takes a little longer but does very well when he can pace himself. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, this is certainly a situation that I hear about very, very often when instructors contact me and they ask me this question. And my answer is usually all the same, which is, well, this is a great example of using the educator's supportive letter and applying for accommodations. And I think that in this particular case, a student will have more chances to have accommodations granted for the HiSET exam rather than GED. So in this case, the educator should write exactly this in the very special letter of support. Should also probably mention their own experience, with instruction, with serving different people with disabilities, and also should also say what kind of accommodations they would ask for this particular individual. The phrase that you said that was very, very helpful in this case should also be put into the letter, saying that after the instructor tried to actually offer the extended time, it was very, very helpful. So in this case, this is what I would do. I would write the educator's letter, and I would mention that this particular student can really, really benefit from, first of all, an extended time, and also from maybe doing the test in a separate room, which is also an allowable accommodation. And hopefully, HiSET exam will approve this kind of request.
Well, one of the things that I'm, reflecting on and appreciating is through the constraints, we actually do have answers here. We have solutions. And that's kind of why I really appreciate having this conversation with you today, Katya, is that, trying to put myself in the shoes of this educator who has this bright student who has these challenges and they don't know what to do for them. And it's just, there are answers. It's just we don't always know what they are. And it's just great to know that there are solutions. And if, like kind of what I was saying earlier, if there's a way to put that within the structure of the program itself, then there wouldn't be instructors who feel alone in trying to help their students. Because I know, personally, I was a part-time instructor for a program that I only taught once a week on Saturday, and there was always a rotating staff member that was there to let us in and to be the support, right? So I know this is a very specific scenario, but putting myself in the shoes of that educator, I can only imagine how can I get support if I don't meet other staff members and they're always changing, and the relationship always changes too, because I see one person, like, so if there's 4 Saturdays in a month, that's 4 different staff members that I'm dealing with for a couple hours, and then it changes again, right? And it's like, how do we convey this information from just those kinds of structures of where it's really hard to get that administrative support just because of the nature of adult ed in this time? And just part of that is really just sharing knowledge. So you sharing this knowledge that you have compiled and that you've worked really hard to convey to people. That's just so valuable.
Nadia, and I can tell you, this is a great, great point. And what I want to add to this is that I think that even though there are some very typical situations that we often see, every once in a while in life of every educator, they are coming into contact with a student and with a problem that they've never really experienced before. Now, if you're not sure for what kind of accommodations you would like to apply, what to say, let's say in your educator's letter, please contact me. Send me an email. And what I will do is that I will use what I've heard and what I've learned from both publishers and what I've learned from different educators in our state and also in other states as well. And I am sure that I will be able to find a path forward for you, for your student. Even if we're going to try and let's say our letter of accommodations is going to be denied, what we can always do as a last resort, we can always switch to NADP. NADP is a perfect pathway for somebody who suffers from test anxiety, who really struggles with taking tests, because it also allows the people to attain the high school equivalency, but through a completely different way, a way that actually requires no testing. So we have many options. And if you're not sure what is a good option for your student, if you just want to have a friendly ear and somebody's point of view, please contact me. I can always help you.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so the National External Diploma Program, we actually have an episode from last season where we interviewed practitioners who support NADP. So yeah, this is an option that is competency-based rather than test-based. So yeah, for more information, I would say, just to plug our podcast again, is just listen to that, the practitioner experience in that. And they do a really great job of just talking about what it's like on the admin side, as well as working with students. And that could be something for your program for students who just aren't great test takers. It's not easy for everybody. It's not. Sometimes it's much easier to show competency in different ways than a summative assessment. So our final question here: are there any additional details you would like to provide for staff or students who are in need of accommodations?
Well, I think that there are so many fine details, and the difficulty is that those fine details are different for 2 different publishers, but a couple I certainly would like to mention. So first of all, for the GED exam, if, let's say, a particular test taker has an approved request for accommodations, this approved request is only good for 2 years. Now, unfortunately, GED currently doesn't send you a reminder. It doesn't say, hey, your request for accommodations is expiring in 2 years, which means that if you would like to still have accommodations when your request expires, you will have to start the process over, which means that you will have to provide a brand new documentation, and your documentation that used to be okay before maybe now is too old. So it's very important to remember that the accommodations for GED are only good for 2 years. And when you come close to 2 years, you can actually, before they expire, you have to ask for an extension. And then if it hasn't expired yet, you can have an extension for another 2 years. So essentially, your request then is actually good for 4 years rather than 2. HiSET doesn't have an expiration date for accommodations. Another very important thing to remember is that after your request for accommodations is approved, you will get an email from the publisher, from GED or HiSET, that will give you all of the details about how to schedule your exam. Remember that many of the accommodations for GED exam, such accommodations like a reader, a scribe, or some adaptive equipment that GED will provide you with, actually require that you contact GED before your exam, and you need to do it preferably a week before you want to schedule your exam. For HiSET exam, you need to contact their accommodation team, and they will actually send you a way to contact them. They will send you a phone number. You need to do it while you're scheduling the exam. So even if you have an approved accommodation request, then if you schedule an exam online and you show up, and then you will expect having an extended time, or let's say having a separate room, most likely this will not happen. So make sure you actually schedule your exam through a special phone number that the HiSET exam will provide you with. Another very, very important point is that for both, for GED and the HiSET exam, there's really no one-to-one correspondence between your medical condition and their accommodations. So if you have a friend who had a specific condition and they had a specific accommodations, do not expect that this is what you are going to have. And the last thing to remember is if you, as let's say an educator, are not sure what to do, well, you can always contact the accommodation team for GED or HiSET exam. They're very friendly, they're very helpful. They will be able to tell you what's allowed, what's not, and what you should do. I actually work with both accommodation teams on a regular basis. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and they'll be able to help you. Oh, maybe one more thing. People often ask me how long it takes to get the approval for the accommodation request. Both publishers say that it takes about a month for the accommodation request to be approved. Now, for GED exam, usually the wait time is slightly less than a month, but close to a month. So I would say that expect maybe 3 weeks before your accommodation request is approved. HiSET team has been working very, very hard on speeding up the approval process. So now what they say is it takes them between 48 to 72 hours to actually get your accommodation request approved, or at least researched. And so you will usually hear from them within a week. So I think this is helpful just so that you know how much time you have and how much you need to plan for your students. For GED exam, even if you're requesting accommodations, your student can still take GED ready exams and start practicing even before you know that your accommodation request is approved.
Wow, this is really great information, and just so many intricacies here. Like it really is a balance. And again, I just can't help but just really appreciate just that support and your thoughts on this and how you get around things. It's really great, really useful. And I just can't help but think about just what you said about the GED there's no structure to remind you of a request being expiring, which means that, like, again, I'm trying to think of it as a practitioner in your shoes, is like, you really have to have all this data and this administrative stuff set up to know that, because I'm just imagining if a student moves from teacher to teacher, and 2 teachers ago put in an accommodation and had to keep that in touch, and then having to do all that stuff all over again, like that could get really messy within a program. And I could see how you have to be really organized and just have this information on your students and making sure that the program has a way to keep track of that. I'm not even I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, how would you even, what would you guys do? Like put a calendar reminder or something? Like, I don't know. Is it like, how would you even know when the letter was requested and stuff like that? I mean, I don't know. People will figure it out. I think just very interesting. Again, Katya, thank you so much for your time. This was so much rich information to really dive into. Really, really good conversation today. Jamie, do you have anything to say before we go?
Just also, thank you so much for that information. I cannot believe how much I learned about the accommodations process and the resources that are available to New Mexico practitioners. And for those of you that don't know, if you send Katya an email, you are going to get a response very quickly. Katya, you are one of the most responsive people I have ever known. And so please do reach out to Katya. She is absolutely happy to hear from you every time, and will do everything she can to help out. So yes, thank you so much, Katya. This was wonderful information, and I cannot wait for this to release.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I know that the issue of accommodations is such a tricky one, and I really hope that this clarified some of the puzzling pieces for some of our practitioners. But for the other puzzling pieces, well, I will be really looking forward to hear from you. Please remember that I'm always here to help you with anything high school equivalency or data related. So I will connect you with the accommodation team for GED or HiSET exam, or I will be able to answer your question. I'm really looking forward to helping your students to actually get the accommodations that they need to be successful in the high school equivalency process.
It is very important to note that while the information provided in this episode was accurate and current, both GED and HiSET accommodation requirements are subject to change. Please make sure to check the GED and HiSET websites for their most current accommodation requirements. And you can always contact Katya Backhaus at the state office if you have any questions. Connect with Adult Ed, the NMEA podcast, is a project of the Propel Professional Learning System and is funded by the New Mexico Higher Education Department's Adult Education Division. Thank you for listening.